Hello Mindbar community, and welcome back to Module 1, where we are going to be establishing a foundational understanding of grief so that you can better support your loved one through their journey. The first thing I want to share with you is my special definition of the grief process. It really helps blow the lid off of the idea that we only grieve death. When someone we love dies, there's so much more that we grieve. What else was lost? What else was taken from us? And even people who have not experienced a loss through death will still experience grief of some kind anytime something is lost or taken without their permission. So, my definition of the grief process is anything that has been taken from you without your permission. So think about that the next time you have somebody who's experienced a divorce, the loss of a job, moving to a new city, a change in relationship, a change in health status. All of those things are ready-made for the grief process. And so anytime you have a loved one who may be experiencing any of those things or something else, think about the grief process and how you may be able to support them in a way that is going to meet their needs. So let's get into my tenets of the grief journey. The first tenet is that anyone who is old enough to love is old enough to grieve. We often think that people who are little don't experience grief, but truly, at any age, during any loss, we experience feelings of grief when something's been taken from us. Think about the toddler who wants to stay at the park, but it's time to leave, and they throw a tantrum. They're literally showing you the grief experience on the outside. Anytime an adult experiences grief, that tantrum is happening on the inside. So we really learn how to grieve appropriately through our culture, but you can see grief right in front of you anytime a little one is experiencing a loss that they didn't choose. So remember to think about that. What's happening on the inside? What tantrum's going on the inside? The next tenet is that grief is a natural, normal response to the death of a loved one or to something being taken from you without your permission. We don't want to lose a person to death. That is permanent. It's painful. I often say if someone isn't grieving a loss, that's odd. So make sure that you don't try to compartmentalize or talk them out of their feelings of grief, because if they're feeling grief, it's because they need to feel it. The next tenet is that we have an innate capacity to heal our grief. And equally, we all have an innate capacity to support somebody through the grief process. Unfortunately, our culture has really handicapped us. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about illness. We don't talk about grief. And so when grief happens to us or someone that we love, we are ill-equipped and we don't know how to manage it. But humans have literally been experiencing grief since the beginning of time. And only just recently, like in the last 100 years, have we stopped readily and openly talking about death, dying, and grief. So think about the idea of individuals in mourning 100 years ago when they would wear black. They would wear black when they experienced a death. And then as they walked down the street, people would stop them on the street, noticing their black garb and say, "Oh my gosh, someone died. Tell me what happened. Tell me your story." And so when we stopped wearing black to show that we were mourning, we stopped having those interactions with people where they would ask, "What happened? How are you doing? What's going on?" And so that process, that outward expression of grief and mourning has been lost. So when we try to put that back in place as we support our loved ones through their grief journeys, we're helping them express their grief in a way that used to be incredibly natural and normal in our culture, but has since gone extinct. The next tenet is that a supportive presence, even just one person that's going to help us through our grief process, will change the trajectory of our grief journey. We need one person that is going to sit with us in our grief, that's going to ask us how we're doing and really want to know. They're going to listen to our hurt and not try to fix it, but just hold space for it. We need one. You're here because you have a desire to be that one. And I encourage you to lean into that and be open to the discomfort that may come with companioning someone through grief. because your supportive presence is the most powerful indicator of healing. The next tenet is that grief will only be expressed when we feel safe and free of judgment. When we talk to others in our grief who want to compartmentalize, silver line, make sense of the loss, make it smaller, it hurts. And we don't typically continue to try to express our grief to people who make us feel like we're wrong, like our grief is small, like we don't deserve to feel as bad as we feel. And so if you find that you've gone out and tried to support a loved one in their grief and they've stopped reaching out to you, that may be an indicator that something went wrong. That doesn't mean give up. It means go back out and repair it. Do better next time. Take what we learn in this course and apply it to the situation and see if you can't turn yourself into a supportive presence. Because again, we all have the capacity to be that for somebody. The final tenet that I want you to remember is this issue in the grief process that really presents itself because grief is hard and it takes up all of our brain to do it. And it takes up all of our patience and all of our energy. So remember this the next time you're going to support someone through their grief process. When an individual is in grief, they have a very, very high need to be understood and a very, very low capacity to understand. And so that disconnect of, I need you to understand my journey and I can't understand why you can't show up for me. It's really difficult because a person in grief, their whole mind is taken up with the tasks of mourning, with the tasks of grieving. And so being incredibly rational, being level-headed is just not something you see very often with someone who is going through active grief. So remember that even though you know this person, you've known them for a very long time, your interactions with them feel irrational sometimes when you're supporting them in grief. And that's normal. They need you to walk with them. You, if you are not experiencing grief, do not need them to join you in your clarity because they can't. That's not a realistic expectation of someone in the grief process. So I encourage you to practice patience and understanding while keeping in mind that high need to be understood and the very, very low capacity to understand. These tenets will really help support you as you navigate this journey through grief with a loved one. Join me for our next module as we dig deeper into how to support someone with grief. Here we go.